Over the last 3 years, I've done over 220 wholesale real estate transactions. I've purchased over 68 doors with a partner, primarily low income to kind of your B, C, a little bit of D quality housing. And here are my biggest takeaways. Buy your first house in cash. Don't try to do a DSCR loan to buy your first house. For us, luckily this was a lesson we did not have to learn the hard way. Our first few houses we bought 100% in cash. After the fact then, we had horrible maintenance and repair expenses come up. Roofs, foundation, HVAC. Now, some of that obviously we should have done our due diligence, but any property, especially if you're going after low income or kind of middle of the road class of properties, are going to have expenses. If we had over leveraged ourselves and not had a strong reserve in cash, we would have gone under. Keep about 10% of what your rent roll should be per year in a separate account you do not touch. When you purchase a property and do the remodel, you should try to knock out as many of the big ticket items as possible. Don't bet on things just, oh, like if it's a 10-year machine, 10-year roof or whatever, if it's kind of in the middle to end of their lifespan, don't bet on them working out. Assume they're gonna fail. We realized this a little too late. We always kind of had this expectation every month of less and less work orders, but in reality, the more you grow your portfolio, they're never going away. They're always gonna be there. So just plan ahead for it and manage your expectations. The next thing, do better inspections when you're buying a property. So typically if you're buying on market, that's part of escrow. You're gonna do an inspection and have like a licensed inspector out there. But if you're working with wholesalers, just don't trust the wholesaler. Do your own inspection, check the big ticket items like foundation, plumbing, electrical, roof, HVAC. The problem we ran into, we'd have the rehab done. The contractor said they checked everything. We move in a tenant, they start using everything and problems come up, which that's expected. You know, flushing a toilet once is not the same as using it every day. When a tenant moves in, brace yourself for there'd be a few things you got to deal with, few work orders, but you can really avoid a lot of those if you do a really thorough inspection before anybody moves in. We were really bad about that for our first year of owning rentals. We'd always just assume like, hey, remodel's done, good to go, throw in a tenant. And every single time tenants would be calling. Self-managing. Look, outsource your property management. Don't just outsource to the first company you find. Do your homework. Get on the investor groups. Ask for word of mouth. Find who the killer property manager is in your market and make sure they have experience with low income or rough properties if that's what you're buying. That changed everything for us. Once we got a property manager that knew the game that tenants play, it rapidly improved both our collections, our occupancy, also my peace of mind. I know some people on bigger pockets will say like you should really self-manage your first handful of properties in order to learn how to property manage. You could learn how to be a good property manager, or instead of learning, you could just focus on getting more deals. You can do it door one. I see no problem with that. You should be spending as much of your time finding good deals, not managing your properties. Because no matter how much preventative work you do, problems come up in property management. It is a reactionary role. Acquisitions is something you can actually grow and where your time is best spent. So I would say a lesson I wish I adopted sooner, don't self-manage. The money you spend, you can make up for it by finding better deals. Going off of having a really good property manager, have more than one really good tradesman for every trade you need. So really good plumber, a really good electrician, and then a really good handyman. Not just with like big companies, like people who are on a first name basis with you, have really good relationships with them and make sure they know your property manager as well. And it'll make crisis much more manageable. As far as like plumbing issues, big ticket stuff, having people that are not just a company, like having good references that aren't just a company, but independent tradesmen is a must. As far as having good relationship with these people, it's pretty simple. High communication as far as like what you expect and want, and then paying them quickly. Always pay your people quickly, and they will jump into action when big problems come up. So the quicker you pay your people, the higher chance you have of them being there for when you really need them, like a house flooding or something like that. So have good contractors, good tradesmen, plumber, electrician, pay them quickly, make sure they know your property manager. A little bonus thing that I was fortunate enough to learn from a far more experienced real estate investor is every property you buy, give it its own LLC. This is for liability protection, because then if a tenant gets hurt in your property, they can't come for you or your whole big main LLC. They can only sue the LLC that the property's in. And if each property's own LLC, the most they could get is the value of the property, and a lot of insurances will cover up to a certain amount of litigation. Another thing, bookkeeping, started early. We didn't do that, which that's probably a pretty basic, obvious first thing, but for some reason we put it off. But every closing, at closing, get all the closing documents and save it in a file at closing. It becomes so much more difficult if you wait till the end of the year and you go through all the properties you did for that year. So at closing, get the jacket for the property put together, and monthly, if you have a bank account specifically for that property, pull those statements and put it into a file. Then regardless of if you are outsourcing your bookkeeping to a CPA to keep up with every month, it'll make it easier. And also when it's come time to do your taxes, it's so much easier. We learned that the hard way. Our first year of doing taxes, I had to go back for every single property and find every closing doc, every LLC doc, every bank statement, transactions, all of that. Pretty obvious, but we didn't realize it. We put it off because we were just so focused on buying deals and moving to the next thing. But yeah, don't get behind your bookkeeping. Outsource it to a good CPA if you can. Another thing, most common investment strategy is the BRRRR model, at least that I see these days. If you are doing that strategy, don't just rely on one source of deals. What I mean by that is don't just rely on your one realtor that always sends you stuff, or your one wholesaler that always sends you stuff, or your one title company that always sends you references, or even just the MLS. The biggest bottleneck to the BRRRR model besides cash is consistent deal flow, specifically deals that work with the 75% minus repairs, closing fees, and etc. formula. Cash is the oxygen to keep everything running, obviously to keep your rehabs going, to keep your business running, but deals are your bottleneck to growth if you're doing the BRRRR method. So the biggest difference I see between the investors I've worked with as a wholesaler that have $60 million portfolios and the investors I work with that have the $60 million investor, he has 20 wholesalers sending him deals, 15 realtors, 4 title companies, and he does his own mailing a little bit. So he does a little bit of his own in-house stuff. The 10 investor, of the 10 wholesalers in his market, 6 of them hate him, 3 of them maybe send him deals, and 1 of them, sends him deals when he remembers. But yes, so the biggest constraint to growth is going to eventually be access to deals. You'll notice in most Facebook groups, every investor is talking about, send me deals, I need more deals, my lender approved me for X amount. The access to capital is very abundant if you have access to good deals. Like if you have a good deal, the money is there. So solve for the deals and manage your cash flows. Obviously do the rehabs. I have to throw that in there. I've talked about this as far as like advice to wholesalers. You can do a 3-legged stool. As an investor, 3-legged stool. Have a good realtor that sends you pocket listings and good deals. Have as many wholesalers as you can. I don't get the whole thing that a lot of investors have where they're rude to wholesalers because they're like, oh, I hate when they send me bad deals. Like they're sending you deals and it costs you 0 money. That wholesaler had to spend money to find that deal, or they had a door knock or cold call or do something that you probably don't want to do. So every wholesaler in your market you can find, have a great relationship with, educate them, give them, positive feedback, whatever you can do. The more wholesalers that like you, the better. Coming from a wholesaler, the investors that were maybe rude or were bad about responding or didn't give me any kind of feedback, once I did start getting deals, they were on the bottom of my list. The investors who educated me and kind of walked me through like how to price a deal and what their criteria, when I started getting deals, they were the first one I would send it to. So good wholesalers. And then lastly, do a little bit of your own marketing. Do something that's decently low overhead. I would not recommend cold calling. Don't cold call. Don't hire a cold caller. It's a lot of work because you'll get a lot of junk leads and you got to deal with inbound. I would say if you are primarily an investor, do a little bit of mailing with a company that handles the inbound part, or do a little bit of PPC or a little bit of SMA if you're willing to grow your Facebook. Also, I really like most PPL companies. It's great. The lead comes to you already qualified, you'll get refunds. But biggest takeaway, have multiple places where your deal flow is coming from. That's what really allowed us to grow quickly, was because obviously we're wholesalers, so we specialize in finding deals. But some of our best deals we got this year were from other wholesalers, even us as primarily wholesalers that do over 10 deals a month, we even still buy from other wholesalers, and we even buy from realtors. We bought from realtors this year, and references from our title company. Yeah, some of our best deals this year were bought from a wholesaler. So if you are a wholesaler and you're watching this, please send us deals. Another thing, when you are obviously first starting to buy deals, the most of seemingly abundant ones will be low-income areas and low-income housing. Just know that low-income properties come with low-income problems as far as vacancy, collections, crime, and a lot of times maintenance, because these are older buildings. I'm not saying we don't like low income. Most of what we own is low income, but just manage expectations. If you're buying low income, expect low income problems, work it into purchase price. Be skeptical, I would say, of most deals that are absurdly cheap that you get sent to you. Learn your low income areas, learn your low income problems to expect, and manage expectations there. Next lesson we learned after we bought up a bunch of duplexes and multi-units. We don't like multi-units anymore. The problem is with multi-units, they have a high turnover. So people are moving in and they don't plan to stay there very long. So they're moving out, and especially if it's low income housing, when someone moves out, you got to do a make ready. You're going to need to do new flooring, paint, everything. So that's, $1,000 every time if it's a small unit. Multi-unit housing is pushed really hard by Grant Cardone, but the category of multi-units he is pushing is more like your A class of real estate, where you have, higher income people living in there. Most of the multi-unit deals, like the average investor will be going after, is going to be your B, C, and D class of housing. And so that means you're going to have really high turnover. Most people are not going to stay in there for more than a year. They will not treat the unit the best, so you'll have to do make readies every time they move out. You'll have to deal with bigger maintenance overhead of a unit. You'll have more drama as far as tenants getting along. People don't like living in multi-units. You have to worry about pest problem, crime, noise complaints, bigger utility issues. Depending on how big it is, you have a commercial sewer line, commercial electrical. But to summarize it, it's our multi-units for this last year have been very hard to stay filled. Our single family houses, people move in and they stay there for 5 years and they treat it like they own it. That's been our experience with multi-units. Duplexes are the worst because you have the problems of multi-units, but you don't have the volume of multi-units. So you have the problem of people not liking their neighbors, utility issues, all this, but you don't have the volume to make up for it. Our strategy going into 2026 is going to be focusing just on single family houses. And if we were starting over, we would have just done that. We would trade every multi-unit we have right now for more single family houses. People move in and they stay there. People are much more likely to do their own work orders and repairs, and they treat the houses better. Water break. Next thing, shop around banks. That's one thing we had to do when we first, we bought our first few properties in cash, and we waited until we were looking to get until we had our next properties lined up before we started shopping around banks. The problem was that shopping banks takes time. Every bank you go to is going to want to see tax returns, your financials, a balance sheet, statement of net worth, and it takes time. Every single bank. If you delay shopping banks until you need them, it's going to be too late, and that's something we messed up on. Shop all your community banks, find out from the other investors what banks they use. Just find one that you can build a long-term relationship with. In tandem with shopping around your banks, have a really good DSCR lender if you're doing the BRRRR method. If you're just buying everything in cash, then ignore this part. But having a really good DSCR lender was so helpful for us to quickly refinance and get our cash out of a property and into another deal. Whereas most bankers they're working on bank hours. They are not commission based, so they'll move really slowly. DSCR lenders and mortgage brokers are commission based, so they will hustle and they'll get in the cage and scrap for you to get a deal closed. But you have to be careful with them because their fees add up. In the event, it is an expensive way to pull money out of your properties. However, it's really quick. So a good DSCR lender and a good community bank. We're still refining our system for refinancing properties. We are trying to get into portfolio loans with some bigger banks to group up properties to save on underwriting fees. But for your first 50 houses, having a great DSCR lender that can just quickly refinance and get you into the next deal is huge. Get a really good DSCR lender, start the relationship earlier than you need it. It's one of the most important parts of the BRRRR model. Another lesson that even as a wholesaler that has access to a lot of deals has to be reminded of, myself, we learned hard way is sometimes no deal is better than a bad deal, which sounds really obvious, but shiny object syndrome and FOMO is real in real estate. I'll see a lot of investors rush to get a deal that maybe they should have just said no to. So I could summarize what we've learned over the last 2 years: go slower to go bigger, go slower to go faster. Not rushing things, slowing things down, taking your time doing inspections and remodels, inspecting before a tenant, taking your time on screening a tenant, and then managing expectations as far as expenses. I have more to talk about, but I'll share that later. If you are a wholesaler and you have a deal you want to sell, please send it to me on Instagram, Alex Vislowski. If you are an investor and you want to buy really good deals that work with the BRRRR model, follow me on Instagram. We can hook you up. We also do our own lending, and we have our own title company. We're a one-stop shop for investors that want to get into deals, get their deals funded, and we do all the title work. And we also buy deals ourselves, and we have a really good dispositions team. So if you're a wholesaler, send us your deal, and we'll help you move it. That's all I got.